Have you ever wondered why your child's meltdown feels like a literal physical attack on your body? Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're skipping the small talk. We are jumping right into one of the most visceral, intense flashpoints of parenting. Let's get right into it.
Picture this. You are in the middle of a crowded grocery store aisle. The fluorescent lights are buzzing overhead, you're exhausted from a long day, and suddenly, your child wants a candy bar. Maybe it's one of those brightly colored ones you didn't even know existed until it was strategically placed right at their eye level. And you say no. In an absolute instant, the situation just detonates. Your child is screaming, they're thrashing around, throwing their little body right onto that cold linoleum floor. It is a massive, uncontrollable public explosion. And right there, in that exact fraction of a second, before you even have the time to consciously process what is happening around you, something profound and totally overwhelming surges through your own body. You don't just feel annoyed, right? No, you feel this massive, gripping wave of panic, heat, and intense distress. It is immediate, and honestly, it is entirely overwhelming. Now, there is this really profound disconnect between what the world assumes is happening in that aisle and what you are actually experiencing on the inside. Society assumes that a parent in this situation is just dealing with an inconvenience, a loud annoyance, someone acting up. But let's take a second to validate what is truly happening inside your body. As you stand over your screaming child, you aren't just frustrated. Your chest is tight. Your heart is hammering against your ribs. You feel this profound sense of humiliation. And on a deeply primitive level, you actually feel as though you're being personally insulted and physically assaulted. It sounds wild to say out loud, but the intensity of your internal reaction is completely disproportionate to the actual event of a kid crying over candy. It's so much deeper than that. So, that brings us to the absolutely crucial question. Why? Why does a child's perfectly normal developmental moment, literally just a temporary loss of emotional control, trigger an existential, fight-or-flight panic response in a grown, highly capable adult? To figure this out, we have to plunge straight into the psychological deep end. We need to completely stop looking at this as just some behavioral issue that needs to be disciplined or punished away. Instead, we have to start looking at it as a clinical mystery of competing nervous systems, two bodies reacting to completely different realities. Okay, so let's dive into this widely held misconception. I call it the illusion of a conflict of wills. Look, when our child explodes, our immediate gut instinct is almost always to think they are doing this to us, right? We think they're intentionally trying to manipulate us or embarrass us in front of strangers or dominate the situation. We view the tantrum as this intense power struggle. But, and this is absolutely key, clinical research shows us that holding on to this perspective only inflames the whole situation. Trying to meet perceived strength with strength, by puffing up our posture, raising our voice, imposing physical force, it only triggers more resistance. The honest truth, your child isn't plotting against you. Their immature brain has simply become dysregulated. It's overwhelmed. So the conflict isn't actually between your will and theirs. The real conflict is happening entirely within your own inherited programming. To truly understand your intense reaction, we have to look backwards. We need to look at the inherited survival rules of your own childhood. Think about it for a moment. If you were raised by caregivers who were emotionally distant, maybe rejecting, or just easily overwhelmed themselves, you very quickly learned that your physical and emotional safety depended entirely on your compliance. You absorbed this implicit set of rules just to survive. Rules like be invisible, always be compliant, never, ever be a source of trouble, suppress your raw sadness and shove down your anger. If your parents couldn't tolerate your big emotional needs, well, you learned to put their comfort first. You learned that presenting a quiet, totally problem-free exterior was literally the only way to maintain a secure connection in your family. And living under those strict conditions day in and day out, it creates something known as affect phobia. Let's slowly unpack this because it's a real game changer. Affect phobia is basically the deeply internalized fear that raw, spontaneous emotional expression is inherently dangerous. Imagine being a kid and expressing sadness or anger resulted in you being shamed or punished or emotionally abandoned. Maybe you heard phrases like, "I'll give you something to cry about." Well, your nervous system had no choice but to adapt to that highly stressful environment. It started categorizing raw emotional displays not as normal human experiences, but as a severe, life-threatening danger. Your nervous system literally learned to be terrified of feelings.
Let's ground this concept in biology for a moment to really see how this works. If we look deep inside the emotional brain's anatomy of threat detection, we find the amygdala. Think of this as your body's internal smoke detector. Its one and only job is to sense danger and sound a massive alarm.
Now, up top in the medial prefrontal cortex is the watchtower. That's the rational, thinking part of your brain that calmly looks around and assesses if the danger is actually real. But here's the catch. When you've internalized affect phobia, your smoke detector becomes hypersensitive to any emotional displays. So flash forward to the grocery store. When your child breaks those implicit survival rules by screaming and thrashing, your amygdala interprets that raw emotion as a massive, impending threat. It fires an unwarranted full-body alarm that completely overpowers your rational watchtower. Your conscious, logical mind is totally shut out. And your body, it prepares to run, hide, or fight for its life. So what is actually happening in that grocery aisle? Basically, we have two completely different realities crashing into each other. The child's reality is just simple developmental dysregulation. Their young, developing brain is temporarily overwhelmed by frustration, and they just do not have the capacity to soothe themselves yet. But the parent's reality, it is entirely different. Because of that firing smoke detector we just talked about, your body is misinterpreting this crying child as a literal, life-threatening danger. It genuinely feels like an existential attack on your security. If we strip away the complex psychology just for a second, the somatic truth is this. Your body actually thinks it is fighting for its life, simply because a little kid is crying over candy. I want you to let this next sentence really sink in. Just let it breathe for a second. A child's meltdown often triggers the parent's unprocessed childhood rules about emotion. Think about that. Really think about it. The panic, the sudden rage, that intense urge to just silence your child, it isn't actually about the candy bar. And honestly, it isn't really about your child's behavior in this present moment either. It's an echo from your past. It is your own unprocessed history. Your own unhealed emotional neglect finally bubbling up and demanding to be seen. This dynamic builds an absolutely fascinating biological chain reaction along the vagus nerve and the autonomic nervous system. You see, our nervous system regulates our physiological states based entirely on how safe we feel. When we feel secure, we operate in a state of social engagement. We can soothe others, we can make warm eye contact, we can speak with a calm, steady voice. But when your child's meltdown triggers that internal alarm from your past, your nervous system violently shifts gears. It completely abandons social engagement and plummets straight into a primitive defense state, fight or flight. This is exactly why, entirely out of your conscious control, your voice gets tight and tense, your throat suddenly gets dry, and your heart just starts racing. Without even meaning to, you are biologically shutting down your ability to connect. And I really want to validate exactly what that physical frame feels like during this kind of nervous system hijack. It's incredibly intense. You might experience this profound, heavy tightness right in the center of your chest. Your breathing suddenly becomes incredibly shallow and rapid. You might feel a sudden jarring surge of heat, or your muscles might just lock up with tension. And above all else, you feel this overwhelming, almost frantic urge to either flee the entire situation or just forcefully silence the child so it all stops. Your body is quite literally bracing for an impact, maybe an emotional punishment or a sudden abandonment that simply isn't coming. It's basically a ghost from your past haunting your present physiology. Now, if this biological panic is left unchecked, we run headfirst into a really tricky phenomenon known as emotional contagion. Because you have temporarily lost your own emotional balance, you actually catch the contagion of your child's distress. And this leads to a disastrous, invisible role reversal. Instead of you being the calm, sturdy anchor for your child's emotional storm, you subconsciously demand that your child stop crying so that you can feel safe again. Think about how wild that is. You are relying on a wildly dysregulated toddler to regulate your adult nervous system. And obviously, they can't do that. So when they fail, your own frustration just escalates into rage. So, the big question. How on earth do we break this cycle? Well, we have to shift our entire focus to what's called bottom-up regulation. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that you literally cannot outthink a nervous system hijack. You can't just tell your rational brain to calm down when your amygdala is blasting the fire alarm. It just doesn't work. To restore the balance between your smoke detector and your watchtower, you have to soothe the physical frame first. You have to communicate safety to your body through actual physical sensation, moving from the bottom up. Only then can your higher brain come back online to accurately assess what's really happening. So let's walk through these highly actionable somatic techniques together. When that meltdown hits, before you even open your mouth to say a single word, stop. First, intentionally feel the solid ground beneath your feet. Literally notice the weight of your body being supported by the floor. Second, Take a deep, slow, intentional breath. Breathe in slowly and just let it out. This physical action signals your vagus nerve to lower your heart rate and shift you right out of that defense state. Third, set a conscious intention to merely observe the child's distress without absorbing it into your own body. Tell yourself, this is their distress, it's not mine. By restoring your own physical equilibrium, you transform into a safe, grounded anchor, fully capable of co-regulating your child's storm. This represents a really profound paradigm shift in how we approach these incredibly difficult moments. The old habit, the one driven by our unhealed childhoods, was to meet force with force. We'd attempt to force the child to stop crying just so our own internal alarm would turn off. It was just this ineffective, exhausting struggle. But the new skill? It is infinitely more empowering. It is the mastery of your own internal security system. By learning to anchor your own physical frame, you reclaim your power. You no longer need the child to behave perfectly just for you to feel secure and okay in the world. When you practice this kind of physical grounding, you are sending a vital, healing message to your oldest brain structures. You are telling yourself, you are safe, they are safe. Building this internal locus of control is exactly how you do the heavy, beautiful work of stopping the generational repetition of emotional neglect. You are drawing a line in the sand. You are refusing to pass down the compliance-based, affect-phobic parenting that you had to endure. You are teaching your child that their raw, messy emotions are not a threat to your love. And the beautiful part, in doing so, you are finally teaching that exact same truth to yourself. I want to leave you with a final, contemplative thought. Something to really reframe your entire parenting journey moving forward. If the panic, the anger, and the overwhelming distress you feel during a meltdown actually belong to your past, how much more grace can you offer your child in the present? When you finally realize the storm isn't actually about you, you are completely free to weather it with compassion. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer today. Keep grounding, keep observing, and please, keep offering yourself the grace you have always deserved.